Nuclear war. Two words that have haunted the world for decades, and now in 2025, they've never felt more real. We are closer to the brink than at any time since the Cuban Missile Crisis, but this time, the flashpoint may not be the Caribbean. It could be right in the heart of Europe. As the Ukraine war grinds on, both Russia and the West are openly discussing the unthinkable: nuclear strikes. Tensions are boiling over, military doctrines are shifting, and experts warn the first strike may not come with a declaration of war, but with a mushroom cloud. This isn't fiction. It's not fear-mongering. It's a chilling new reality that Europe is staring down. So what would actually happen if nuclear war broke out? The truth is far more terrifying than most people realize. Let's take a closer look at what's really at stake, how a single tactical strike could trigger a chain reaction of destruction, how prepared Europe is or isn't, and what global fallout could follow in the days, weeks, and years after the first bomb drops. For most people, the thought of nuclear war conjures images of the complete annihilation of entire cities, millions dying of radiation poisoning and billions more from an extended nuclear winter. As we'll discover, in the event of a full-blown nuclear war between NATO, particularly the US, and Russia, not to mention China, these scenarios will be all too real. However, nuclear weapons have come a long way since the US dropped nukes on Hiroshima and Nagasaki in 1945, and a nuclear exchange no longer necessarily means full-blown nuclear war. In the age of tactical nuclear weapons, mutually assured destruction, or MAD, is all but guaranteed in the event of the use of strategic nuclear weapons, but is not a given. The bomb dropped on Hiroshima weighed approximately 9,900 pounds and was responsible for more than 100,000 deaths by the end of 1945. Since then, significant strides have been made in miniaturizing the technology. Today's nuclear weapons are more compact and usually weigh just hundreds of pounds, but have the potential to kill millions of people. The main threat to Europe in terms of nuclear war is, of course, Russia. Some of the nuclear weapons Russia has at its disposal today are over 50 times more powerful than those dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Like the US and China, Russia boasts a nuclear triad, which refers to its ability to launch nuclear weapons from land via ground-based silos and mobile missile launching systems, from the air, dropped from strategic bombers like the T-22M, and by its nuclear-powered submarine fleet. Russia also has, in total, more nuclear warheads than the nuclear-armed NATO allies put together. As of 2022, Russia was estimated to have 5,500 nuclear warheads, of which around 1,500 have been retired. Around 1,588 are believed to be deployed, with 2,889 held in reserve. In comparison, the US has around 5,044 warheads in total, of which 1,336 are estimated to have been retired, 1,770 are deployed, and 1,938 are held in reserve. The UK has an estimated 225 active nuclear warheads with 60 deployed and 120 in reserve, while France has an estimated 290, which are all deployed except for 10 held in reserve. So without the US's involvement in a nuclear war against Russia, Europe is at a roughly 10-fold numerical disadvantage in terms of nuclear warheads. To be sure, as we will discover, the UK and France's combined 470 nuclear warheads would cause catastrophic damage to Russia. But even if Russia only used half of its nuclear arsenal on Europe, saving the rest for attacks on the continental US, Russia's numerical advantage in terms of nuclear warheads would probably mean substantially worse damage inflicted on Europe. That's likely to be exacerbated by Europe's relatively compact geography and many high-density population centers. That's if all of these nukes work as expected. Most of the world's nuclear weapons are from the Cold War era. Although many have been upgraded over the years, all explosive weapons, missiles, and nuclear warheads degrade over time, as do launching systems and other associated equipment. In December 2023, Russian President Vladimir Putin claimed that the proportion of modern weaponry in Russia's nuclear forces had been raised to 95%, with the naval components approaching 100%. However, as the many issues encountered by Russia with respect to storage and maintenance of other weapons systems like tanks and artillery during the Ukraine war have demonstrated, modernizing them doesn't necessarily mean they will work as expected. Indeed, even the US has experienced issues with older nuclear systems, such as the failed test of a Minuteman III intercontinental ballistic missile, or ICBM, in November 2023. There's also the possibility that any number of launched nuclear weapons could be shot down by opposing air defense systems. However, at this point, it's extremely optimistic to expect this to be the case, on both the Russian and NATO sides, particularly when it comes to ICBMs. Technically, the US military has the capability of shooting down an ICBM, but the method is complex, imperfect, and continually evolving. The defense relies on a layered system of interceptors designed to detect, track, and destroy incoming ballistic missiles at various points along its flight path. Success, however, is far from guaranteed and depends on numerous factors. The US's missile defense architecture, which is largely what protects Europe, is a network of sensors, command and control infrastructure, and interceptors. It includes the ground-based mid-course defense, Aegis ballistic missile defense system, terminal high-altitude area defense, and space-based sensors, which are currently under development. The layered, multifaceted approach aims to increase the probability of a successful interception because any single interceptor has a chance of failure. However, the system is primarily focused on defending against limited attacks from the likes of North Korea or Iran, not a full-scale barrage from Russia or China. The sheer number of incoming missiles from a large barrage, combined with the sophistication of their countermeasures, would almost certainly overwhelm the system. So in the event of a limited exchange of tactical nuclear weapons, there's a decent chance that NATO's air defenses would offer Europe some measure of protection. However, in the event of a large-scale barrage, Europe would be in trouble. Even taking into account the US's air defense systems in Europe, NATO reportedly only has around 5% of the air defenses it needs to protect Eastern Europe from a large-scale conventional barrage, let alone nukes. Traditional strategic nuclear weapons are generally used to target cities, but can also be used to target large and important military assets like bases and naval strike groups at sea. Tactical or non-strategic weapons, on the other hand, are low-yield weapons designed to be used on the battlefield to tip a conflict in one's favor. Russia possesses an estimated 1,900 tactical nuclear weapons, and a nuclear war in Europe would likely start with the launch of one or more of these. Russia's updated nuclear doctrine states that if a non-nuclear armed nation like Ukraine, backed by nuclear powers like UK or France, attacks elements of Russia's nuclear deterrence with conventional weapons, then Russia can deliver a preemptive nuclear strike in response. The targets would not just be the nation that carried out the attack, but the nuclear powers that backed them too. Ukraine's May 2025 attacks on Russian strategic nuclear-capable bombers at various airfields deep inside Russia certainly fit the bill of attacks on Russia's nuclear deterrence using conventional weapons. And since it's almost inconceivable that these attacks were carried out without some degree of input from Western surveillance and intelligence, the nations that provided it could also technically be targets for a Russian nuclear strike. However, the Russians probably wouldn't risk firing off a full-scale nuclear barrage at countries like the UK and France, unless the existential threat of a large-scale defeat in Ukraine was imminent, and it's not. If they did use nuclear weapons, it's much more likely that the Russians would use tactical nukes to strike a significant target in Ukraine, such as the bridges over the Dnieper River. Perhaps they might even go so far as to strike a NATO base in Poland or Romania. This would in part be as a form of deterrence against further attacks on Russia's nuclear assets. However, it might also act as a way of testing the resolve of various NATO member states toward their Article 5 commitments. Article 5 of the NATO Charter essentially requires NATO members to come to the military aid of a fellow member state should it be attacked, but doesn't specifically define the extent of that aid. Certainly, there's little to suggest that the nuclear doctrines of both France and the UK extend the use of their nuclear arsenals beyond the defense of their own territories to other NATO members in terms of Article 5. It's also unclear how many, if any, of France's nuclear warheads are of the tactical as opposed to strategic variety. The UK possesses no tactical nukes. Bottom line, if Russia attacks European targets with one or more tactical nukes, Europe would either be reliant on the US to conduct countering tactical nuclear strikes or unable to respond in kind, or in the case of the UK and France, escalating to using strategic nuclear strikes on Russia. Opinions as to how a nuclear war might play out vary widely between experts on the subject. However, almost all agree that one of the biggest risks is that once the nuclear genie is released from the bottle, the consequences are extremely unpredictable. A single tactical nuclear strike on, say, an airfield where Ukrainian F-16 and Mirage 2000 fighters are based could quickly escalate into a full-blown global thermonuclear war. Depending on the target, the consequences of a strike with one or a few tactical nuclear warheads would be devastating but controllable. A direct hit on a nuclear power plant would be the equivalent of a strategic nuclear blast, causing widespread devastation and all kinds of horrific consequences, which we'll discuss shortly. Similarly, direct hits on critical infrastructure like key components of the power or communication grids would cause nationwide disruption and chaos. But in almost all other cases, the damage will be localized and manageable, relatively speaking. An area up to the size of a city block may be destroyed by the detonation and by the shockwave and fireball that follow. Depending on the population density and the immediate surroundings, casualties could be in the tens or even hundreds of thousands. However, the radiation fallout would only cover an area limited to several square miles, and the force of the explosion would not be enough to create nuclear winter conditions, or to disrupt agriculture in the surrounding countryside for an extended period of time. Ground Zero would be a mess, to put it mildly, but the rest of the country and even other areas of the same city would have a good chance of surviving intact. In April 2025, the Commissioner of Preparedness and Crisis Management for the European Commission, Hajj Labib, advised the EU's 450 million residents to pack a 72-hour survival bag, as the bloc braces for what she calls threats that are more complex than ever. This is a major component of the new EU preparedness strategy, which includes dozens of action points, including setting up a crisis coordination hub and instructing all residents to pack the aforementioned emergency kits. According to Labib, these packs should contain a torch, matches and lighter, a Swiss Army knife or similar multi-purpose tool, water, a basic first aid kit including necessary medications, food for 72 hours, cash, a phone charger and battery pack, and a radio. The packs are designed to prepare citizens to survive the first 3 days after a major disaster when circumstances are at their most difficult and dangerous. Logistics, emergency services, communications networks, the power grid, and other critical infrastructure may be destroyed or compromised, and the better prepared one is, the better chance of survival. Unless you're at or near ground zero of a tactical nuclear strike, in which case you have very little chance of survival, a pack like that should enable you to survive and get through the attack. Even a limited distance of a few dozen miles between you and the blast epicenter should be enough to keep you safe and more or less unscathed. But if a full-blown nuclear war using strategic nukes in Europe breaks out, the future on the continent and much of the rest of the world looks bleak indeed. Many European cities, such as Bonn, Prague, and Kyiv, still have Cold War-era nuclear bunkers that can house thousands of citizens if nuclear war breaks out. However, the vast majority of the European population would not be able to fit in these, even if they were able to reach them in time. Regardless of which side fired the first shot, within minutes the other side's satellites and radar systems would detect them, and within a few minutes more, counterstrikes would be launched. Most Central European cities would have approximately 10 minutes to find shelter, with cities like London and Dublin perhaps having up to 20 minutes. You can imagine the chaos as millions of people try to reach shelters built for thousands. In this regard, Russia's civil defense preparations are somewhat more advanced. In 2024, Russia began mass production of mobile, nuclear-resistant bomb shelters, known as the Kub-M model. These shelters are designed to protect up to 54 people from nuclear radiation, shockwaves, chemical exposure, and fire for up to 48 hours. They're equipped with life support systems including air filtration, heating, and water supply, are transportable via rail or road, and can be deployed even in harsh environments, such as Russia's northern permafrost regions. Of course, cities like Moscow and St. Petersburg, with populations of around 12.7 million and 5.6 million inhabitants respectively, would need umpteen thousand of these shelters to protect the majority of the population. It's unclear whether Russian mass production will extend to anywhere near that level and just how much protection they'll actually provide against even a single nuclear warhead. The devastation from just one nuclear warhead would be catastrophic, and Europe is likely to face hundreds in quick succession. A single Russian Topol-M missile would explode into a 0.6-mile-wide ball of fire as hot as the core of the sun, incinerating every living thing it touched. Within a 4.3-mile radius, countless civilians would be vaporized instantly, die from severe burns and/or be crushed under the rubble of buildings destroyed by the shockwave. All but the most strongly reinforced buildings would likely fall. Firestorms would engulf the cities that have been hit, with storm-level winds fanning the flames, igniting anything that can burn, melting gas and some metals, and turning asphalt into flammable hot liquid. Then there's the radiation spread by a radioactive mushroom cloud, which would saturate the blast site and poison air and water for years or possibly even decades to come. To put that blast area into perspective, London covers an area of just over 600 square miles, Rome just under 500, Berlin around 345, Kyiv 325, and Warsaw 200. So it would take dozens of Topol-Ms to destroy these cities and everyone in them, but Brussels only covers around 63 square miles, Amsterdam 84, and Paris only 40. So it won't take all that much to turn them into X-cities. In contrast, Moscow covers almost 414 square miles, meaning even the entire British nuclear arsenal would likely be insufficient to destroy the whole city, let alone the rest of the many cities and military installations scattered across Russia's vast territory. But how might an actual nuclear exchange in Europe play out? A 2023 simulation put together by Time magazine in conjunction with a group of nuclear scientists hypothesizes that the very first strikes would aim to fry electronics and power grids by creating an electromagnetic pulse of tens of thousands of volts per meter. The next strikes would target command and control centers and nuclear launch facilities. Finally, major cities would be targeted both because they contain military facilities and to stymie the enemy's post-war recovery. Another simulation by researchers at Princeton's Science and Global Security program in 2019, called Plan A, suggests a similar trajectory. In their simulation, Russia fires a warning shot from the Kaliningrad exclave to to which NATO retaliates with a single, tactical nuclear airstrike. Russia then sends 300 warheads via aircraft and short-range missiles to hit NATO bases and troop concentrations. With much of Europe destroyed, NATO then launched around 600 warheads from US land and submarine-based missiles at Russian nuclear forces. But before its weapons systems are destroyed, Russia fires missiles launched from silos, road mobile vehicles, and submarines, both at Europe and the US itself. Finally, both Russia and NATO target the 30 most populated cities and economic centers of the other side, with 5 to 10 nuclear warheads dropped on each, depending on population size. Plan A estimates that 34.1 million people could die and another 57.4 million could be injured within the first few hours of the start of such a nuclear war, triggered by just one low-yield nuclear weapon. Assuming you're far enough away from ground zero of one of these strikes and have your 72-hour emergency pack at the ready, you might well survive the initial EMP blast, explosions, firestorms, and collapsed buildings. If you're stocked up on iodine tablets, you may survive the effects of radiation poisoning, possibly even for years to come. And if you're stocked up on food, arms, and ammunition, barterable goods, medicines, and other essentials, you may just survive the economic and societal chaos that is bound to follow nuclear war. Government, healthcare, communications, security, logistics, and supplies of basics like food, water, and fuel will all inevitably be utterly disrupted, with unpredictable but grim consequences and outcomes. However, peer-reviewed research suggests that's far from the worst of it, and it's not just for Europe but for the entire planet. Plumes of thick, black carbon smoke from the nuclear firestorms would rapidly rise into the stratosphere, far above any rain clouds that would otherwise wash out the smoke. This black smoke would be heated by sunlight, lofting it like a hot air balloon for up to a decade. Once this smoke reaches the high-altitude jet streams, it would only take a few days for these super-fast wind currents to spread the smoke across much of the northern hemisphere. The result? Global nuclear winter. The blanket of toxic soot covering the Earth would cause temperatures to plummet, even during the summer. Within weeks, farmland in Kansas would cool by about 40 degrees Fahrenheit, with Europe potentially cooling almost twice as much. A report published in 2020 in Nature estimates that over 5 billion people could starve to death, including around 99% of those in the US, Europe, Russia, and China. That's because most black carbon smoke stays in the northern hemisphere where it's produced, and because temperature drops harm agriculture more at high altitudes. Chaos is also likely to ensue in the rest of the world, as the global financial system and economy collapse, along with trade, law and order, and security. As Alex Glazer, one of the creators of Plan A, told Newsweek, "I would not want to speculate how long it would take for humanity to recover." So all things considered, perhaps the last word should go to Alicia Sanders-Zachra, Policy and Research Coordinator at the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons. "There is no sane plan once a nuclear weapon is launched," she says. "A better plan is to reject nightmare nuclear scenarios and support the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. Hopefully, we'll never have to face full-scale nuclear war." In the meantime, make sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any updates, and let us know your thoughts in the comments. Thank you as always for watching.